Good evening, everyone. Apologies, we're a bit late starting this evening. Um, Welcome to the Bluetongue information webinar that we have on. We have two very good guests coming on for us this evening. We have Alan Murphy. He's the veterinary lead for toxicology and chemical feed and food safety surveillance intelligence unit at APHA in the UK. So Alan's going to talk through his experience with Bluetongue this last while. He's down in the southeast of England, so he's been dealing with it since, I suppose, November 2023. At this stage, we also have Avril Hobson coming in. She's the Senior Superintending Veterinary Inspector in the National Disease Control Centre here in the Department of Agriculture. So Avril's going to go through the trade and testing implications, and I suppose what we've seen over the past while, and we might get our own animal health chair, David Hall, to say a few words at the end. We're going to start off with Alan here in a second, but we might do just a few Q&As afterwards if we still have time. So anybody that has a few questions, just put them in the Q&A box up at the top of the screen. But consider we're a bit late, we'll kick off here. So Alan, whenever you're ready, if you want to go.
Okay, we're going to see if we can get this share screen, so keep in touch with me just in case it doesn't come up. So let's see.
Yeah, you're up, ready to go there.
Right, what can you see there?
Yeah, Bluetongue virus and beyond. So it's the first slide, I think.
Right then, so let's have a look. So it's quite visible to you all then, you can see that, okay?
Yeah, that's very good.
Doesn't seem like I'm in presenter mode. Right then, so I'm going to switch my camera off, just try and make it a bit easier for everybody not to focus on me. Good evening, everyone. This talk really came about from a couple of sort of questions and sort of requests, so I get a bit of an insight as to what we've seen over here in terms of the UK and England and Wales, etc., and Scotland to a smaller extent. And to some extent, really try and prepare you for what you might be coming to see over there in the next year or two. We know it arrived on your shores last year. And at the end of the day, whether it was there beforehand, we'll never know. Bluetongue really came about it's a virus that's been known for decades, centuries, etc. It's a well-established virus. Currently, there's 29 serotypes. 4 of these don't actually cause disease, and that's absolutely no consolation whatsoever, because the other 25 do, to be quite honest with you. So our concerns obviously from the fact that we first saw this over here in the UK in 2008 when we had BTV8. Now, BTV3 arrived in Europe about sort of 2023, and the Dutch got hammered by it. It wiped out large populations of sheep, it caused significant milk drop in cattle, it caused a lot of problems. And the concern was, well, really what's going to happen when we start getting these midges blown across the channel, because they're going to come. So 2024, we were sort of all geared up, ready to get panicked. Julie arrived, we saw a few cases, but we didn't see the mass mortality situation that you saw elsewhere in Europe. We sort of had niggly problems here and there, a few sick sheep. And so the policy at that point was saying, well, how do we deal with this? How do we cope with it? It's a notifiable disease. It's a SAPO3 disease as well. So there's a substantial amount of challenges come with managing it. And there's also the fact if you've got Culicoides midges. Now, people basically say you'll struggle to try and kill a fly with a piece of paper. How the hell are you going to try and kill 10,000 midges? Similar principle. You can use all the insecticide in the world. You know you're not going to make a substantive impact on it. And the problem is that Bluetongue, it's a reovirus. There's other ones out there that are causing potential problems as well. Now, in Ireland's perspective, you have a thriving...
Alan,
yep.
I don't think your slides are moving there.
All right, hang on a minute. I'll come back and see if we can get this out. So let's go to... Damn thing. Give us 2 seconds. We'll stop sharing and see if we can bring it back out.
Perfect.
Right. Let's go to share. Right. How are you looking now?
Yeah, they're up there now.
Right. And is that full screen now?
Yeah, full screen.
All right. So, are we now on Bluetongue virus?
Yes, you're good
to go. Apologies. So, you got the speech in terms of the fact that we know pretty much this is a virus. It's got all sorts of different little pals that come along with it, one of which is obviously African horse sickness. And the problem is we're getting these midge populations established. Now, from our perspective, the concern is what else are they going to bring at some point over the future. So, it's really a sort of exercise in terms of how do we manage these diseases and how do we control them. From the point of view of looking at Bluetongue, we're also going to throw a few extra slides in at the end of this presentation. There's only 27 slides and a lot of pictures. Trust me, I know how these things work at this time of night. It's not to be too laborious in the principle, but it's really just to give you a principle as to what we're going to see and what you're going to potentially get challenged. Now, 2024, we were waiting at the gates, waiting for this to start causing problems. It arrived. So we had a policy in place. We started to have it on the East Coast. We knew that's where it was going to arrive, the midges, etc. So we put into place restrictions. Now, the restrictions were there for two reasons. One, is to stop the movement. Now, you might think, well, that's not going to make an impact on midges. Well, it doesn't. The midges are going to creep. There's no way you're going to control them. But it stops the jump effect. It stops the jump effect of moving livestock that are full of virus, that are showing no clinical signs whatsoever, and you move them into an area which is free and clear. And all of a sudden, you're transported a virus factory into an area that's completely susceptible to stock, and you see wholesale changes. So we put this sort of rolling barrage in place. The problem we had is it hammered the people on the East Coast. All of a sudden, they couldn't move stock. They were restricted to which abattoirs they could move to. They were restricted in terms of what stock they could sell to whom, and it caused substantive problems. Now, government being government, we know we're never perfect in explaining things, but that was the reason why we did it. It was to stop this spread happening too quickly. We knew realistically we weren't going to stop it overall, but we did what we could do to try and minimize the spread so we could get prepared. Funnily enough, so we could get vaccine out, so we could get vaccine into people if they wanted to do it. It came to 2025, we pretty much had said, well, you know what, we can't do an awful lot. And that grey coloration you can see on that slide is actually to indicate the cattle density populations. Now, cattle are the factories in this case. They've shed large amounts of virus in terms of their bloodstream. And if you have the midge population, they come along and hoover up. So we weren't seeing much in the way of clinical disease. Even in 2025, we're seeing the odd report now and then. Now, there's a substantial amount of that that said, well, how do you determine what's Bluetongue and what's just maybe a slightly off-colour cow for a day or so? There's a lot of nuances in this virus in terms of how it presents. And the thing you always have to remember, we can present all sorts of books to you over the years and say, this is how this disease should do this and this should do that. Pathogens, viruses, bacteria, parasites, they can't bloody read. So at the end of the day, what we thought they should do, they didn't. So we didn't see the mass deaths of sheep. We didn't see the substantive impacts on cattle until the end of 2025. Now, this is the bit we want to focus on in terms of what our experiences are of this disease, in terms of how it's presented to us. Now, it maybe presents to us in this way because we've got a lot more fresh air. Maybe we're not as dense in terms of livestock we keep. Maybe we've got the different types of breeds. No one's quite got to the bottom of it yet. But there are variations in how it seemed to hit England and Wales, and to some extent not Scotland yet, but we know it will, and how it's maybe going to manifest itself with you folk over there. So just to be conscious of it. So our first port of call was a discussion. We got first phone calls and saying, look, we're getting a few weak calves. And everybody expects the odd weak calf now and then. But the vets are also said, well, hang on a minute, we also want to sort of flag up some maybe poor scanning results as well on spring calvers that just not got to the game. And so is there a fertility issue that we maybe haven't recognised as much with Bluetongue? Because as you remember, it's killing things over in Europe. It wasn't actually getting to the point of actually getting to an infertility problem. But we also thought, well, hang on a minute, we're seeing some manifestation here that's actually a bit more pertinent to our picture. And these are mainly sucklers. So at the end of the day, they're thinking, well, could the BTV maybe be having different effects in terms of what it hit us in the summer or the autumn of 2024? This is what we're now seeing impacts with, these scanning results. Or is it fertility? Is it lack of trace elements? Is it poor silage? Well, yeah, it could be all of those. We know that. There's a lot of different causes. But we also wanted to make sure that maybe Bluetongue wasn't part of this. Poor bull fertility is always a factor to consider. They're 50% of the herd in terms of whether you get them from calf or not. But one bull off in terms of firing can be substantive in terms of impact. So we thought, let's have a look. So my job, as well as doing a lot of other things, is actually to open up a knife. Glaswegian from a dodgy neighbourhood, at the end of the day, I'm pretty handy with a knife. And then if someone actually trains me how to be even better with it, I'm pretty adept at getting these things open. So we started to look at these calves. And the idea was we're going to do post-mortems on them. So we started to get them in. Again, there was a local fertility issue in terms of people saying maybe it's a bull issue, maybe it's a cow issue. So I said, well, actually, you know what, we'll get them in, have a look, see what's going on. The calves are going to be the sort of fundamental measurement of what's actually happening, and that will give us a lot of answers. We can determine whether it's an infectious problem or it's a not infectious problem. Once we got to the findings, which we'll get to in the next few slides, we had a couple of meetings. This then expanded into even greater number of meetings and discussions and presentations, etc. Because the principle is we're trying to get to the bottom of whether this is a Bluetongue component or whether it wasn't. What advice could you give? Because remember, it's notifiable. We need to be concerned with the fact that actually we still need to make measures and steps if we did suspect it, what we do in terms of what advice we give. So in terms of what we did with histories, the histories are all pretty much the same. You open them up, what'd you get? Well, we had poor scanning results. We had some abortions, but we didn't really want to report them that much because they weren't that much. It didn't really trigger a factor of maybe 2 or 3%, so we didn't get that excited. But the stillbirths, these are off cows. They weren't off heifers. They're off cows that had done the job year in, year out, and all of a sudden you're getting problems. And even the ones we get out alive, they're pretty rubbishy calves. Good shape, good size, maybe not quite as good as we want, but nothing in terms of vigour. They had no effect whatsoever. And then you start going down the whole line. Was it a bull effect? No, the bull's been there for years. He's not a problem, etc. And then some of them had so few issues, the fact that they were getting a hell of a lot of calves lost. And they're talking 50% non-viable. Now that is an impact that no one can sustain. And at the end of the day, it became fairly evident that actually, you know what, there's probably a major issue going on here. The interesting thing when we actually went to a fairly detailed history here was only one of these herds had a cow or two that was showing what they thought could have been Bluetongue. Runny nose, bit off colour. Thinking, okay, well, could that have been Bluetongue? I didn't really want to bother you because it was housed. Didn't really think it could have been, thought it was just a bit of runny nose cow. And those ones you then think, well, maybe we did miss something. And this is the type of picture we were looking at. They're vacant or dummies. Now, you get some calves go down with cholesepticemia within a couple of days of life. They're well recognised and well known, but not these numbers, not to the standard of what we were looking at. And the signs were slightly different. When you're looking at two areas that are primarily affected, the head end. So in terms of what we saw circling, seizures, blindness, head pressing, a lack of suck reflex, and stargazing was quite evident as well. And they had nothing about them. They were just passive, just laid there, did no life about them at all. Cows were licking them to buggery, trying to get them going, but they did nothing. And then you had other things. You'd got the odd one, get it stood up. They couldn't stand very well. They were weak. Now, it's got to be selenium. Wide base gait. When you actually get into the world of neurological examinations, you think, well, actually, that's a brain situation. That's not related to muscles. It's not related to spinal cord. It's upstairs. It's actually within the brain. And even then, there's certain bits of the brain you can rule out quite quickly as to what that's likely to be. So when we actually opened them up, they had profound deficits. Now, when I say profound deficits, you're going to see some images in a minute that will show you just how serious these are. But they've got two conditions, porencephaly, hydrancephaly. They're to a degree a gradation on each one. Basically, it's just based on virtually no brain present, no functional brain present. And so we thought at this point, well, we've got fairly good evidence here that there's probably been an impact going on at the early stage of gestation where these animals have got a very early developing neural tube. So what's happening is there's a virus or so, or it can be plant toxins and various other things, but something's going in. And the numbers were screaming to us and look, this is going to be an infectious problem. And BTV3 does this. It basically gets in and starts to wipe out the brain. And basically you've got nothing left. And when we tested these 8 calves that had come in, 7 of them were positive for BTV. The virus can get cleared or the virus can just disappear and you can't find it, but 7 of them out of the 8 were positive, so we knew we had a problem. The condition, as I say, basically affects the midbrain and the brain stem. It's fine. It's the other parts of the brain are okay. So the calves have still got movement. They're not shaking on the ground, etc. The cerebellum, the bit that focuses on your balance, they're all okay. So these calves wanted to go, but they had no signals to get anywhere. So basically it's relating to the fact of all the fluid you've got in your brain, it just doesn't go, and it builds up and builds up and builds up. So you end up with massive dilatation and pressure. And these tissues are very delicate, so any pressure on them, they die very rapidly, no function. So it's consistent with BTV. At the end of the day, we have to flag it again to DEFRA saying they might not have shown clinical signs of BTV, but everything we've got in front of us says this is going to be BTV. But there are some other useful indicators as well, beyond the dopey calf, the dummy calf, etc. A few other things we found at PM that gives a bit of an idea. Pneumonias, because invariably the first thing people do is a bit of a slow calf, you tube it. And these calves don't do very well with tubing, so quite often they've got a pneumonia. Corneal ulceration, they were blind quite a lot of times and they couldn't move, so they're walking into walls and causing themselves all sorts of damage. 1 or 2 had maybe undershot jaws. An interesting facet that we're still seeing now is lens opacity and red noses. Now, the red nose, you think, well, that could be anything. Well, actually, we reckon it's due to the fact they've got vascular damage at the end of the nose, and this is what's causing the problem. And if you think how much challenge is going on in those heads, that's realistically what we're looking at. Now, this is a gory bit. So at the end of the day, the cavitation was profound. We found SBV, looking for Schmallenberg, looking for BVD, nothing. So from that perspective, we knew they were going to be looking at Bluetongue in these calves. So the postmortems are quite revealing. That's the images you're going to see now. So for those of you with a delicate disposition, please look away. However, assume you're all grown up and at the end of the day, we're close enough to the 9 o'clock watershed to be conscious of the fact that this is the reason why you're looking at these things. These are the things you're going to see. And these aren't nuanced. They're not a couple of cells missing. They're not a couple of little things you think, maybe, maybe not. When you see things like this, you know you've got some severe damage. These are catastrophic lesions. There's no way these animals are viable in any way. At the end of the day, these are brains from the ones we looked at out of those 8 that we're talking about, etc. Now, try to determine how much cavitation. Really, who cares? At the end of the day, you've got substantive damage that makes that calf no longer viable. And these are the problems we see. And we've got a few more into that picture as well. Now, the calf on the right, you're going to see that in a little bit more detail over the next couple of minutes, etc. Now, with that in mind, these images are basically taken from the fact that we did postmortems as a rule, that's our job, and it's to have a look and see how severe the pathology is. That pathology tells us as to what likely problems we're dealing with. And the images are quite striking, but they are what they are. So when you're taking the brain out, it can be quite substantive, but you look at the head before you actually open it up. You look for the red noses, you look for the shortened jaw, etc. These are all relevant components to us. So in terms of the pathology, this is your dopey calf. Now, I'm hoping that's coming through all right. Can you reaffirm it's all right there, Donald? Can you see that?
Yeah, that's coming through perfect.
Grand. This is your dopey calf. Now, you think, a bit of a slow, bit of a short calf, but watch it. Blind, just puts its head through, and not. This is a 2 or 3 day old calf. It's got nothing to it. You're thinking, well, it's got a headache from hell. It can't see. That's why they get corneal ulceration. That's where they get the damage from. That's why they get these pneumonias as well, because they can't swallow properly. Basically, they just dribble the milk down into the esophagus, and some of it spills back into the trachea, and you get a bit of pneumonia from that. So these are the lesions that we see with these ones. The red noses, not an uncommon finding. It tends to disappear after about a week or so, just due to sort of general circulatory improvement, but that calf's still wrong. The BTV, could it be something else? I think realistically we know this is probably going to be one of these little nuanced clinical signs that you see with it. Now that is how we sort of say, well, actually, you know what, on farm, you can do a fairly empirical assessment. Now, this is the empirical assessment. When I put this video up, I want you to look at the back of the head, because that's the relevant component here. Watch the fluid flow out of this calf. Please ignore the fact that the guy's got bare hands. At the end of the day, it's not always a health and safety perfect situation in any farm, as you all know. And at the end of the day, I would always recommend don't do this at home. But this is one of our vets trying to prove, because they had the ministry with them there at the time, just how catastrophic the lesions are, to emphasise to a degree to the ministry, look, these have got problems. Now, try to rip a calf's head off with your fingers, doesn't work. You need one of these things, which is called a T-bar. Now, put a T-bar in, and lift up the skull, and away you go. Now, you think about what you'd normally think to find in there. Look at the fluid. Nothing. Now, I don't need to emphasise, you know that calf's not viable. We put that calf down. That was that calf 10 minutes before the exercise you've just seen. It's got a jacket on. You can see it's stargazing. It's looking up into the world, going nowhere. And you're thinking, okay, it could be a dopey calf, maybe not right, etc. Yeah, you're right. In all those circumstances, this is the sort of lesions that we now see in Bluetongue on a regular basis on our farms. This is what we're coming up with. So from the premise of actually got that type of calf, and you see even there, you can see that discoloration on the eyes in terms of opacity as well. This is the walk they have. See how much it places its feet out? That's not because it doesn't have pain, it doesn't have a balance system, it's basically because it doesn't know where it's going. And then at the end of the day, you lie them down, they've just got nothing. It tries to correct itself, it tries to go. You can see how much attention the cow's given to it, it's just got nothing. Now, when I tell you that over the past 3 weeks, we've probably seen 50 to 100 of these reported. One farm alone has got 30 on their farm. Spring caver, dairy. Yeah, the milk price might be crap, but you certainly don't want this to be adding to your problems at the same time. And this is what BTV is doing in England and Wales, and it's going to arrive in Scotland. And now it's on your side of the pond, it's going to start causing you guys problems as well. So you need to be aware. Now, we can go into all the fancy science. Why does it do it? Why does it not do it? We know there's certain stages of gestation. Now, this might give you some benefit in terms of when you maybe want to target what you do with your vaccines, etc. But trust me when I tell you that vaccine is the only way you're going to prevent this disease from impacting on your herd. There's no amount of acaricide, there's no amount of insecticide, there's no point in putting them in a building or putting them out in the wilds of fresh air, because yeah, maybe you put them on the top of a hillside where nothing can stand upright, certainly even the midges can't fly to them, you might be safe. But beyond that, any day-to-day management where you've got animals in on a regular basis, milkers in particular, when you're doing things with them like milking them or stood in the collection yard, you and I know how many midges you see. They are not an unavoidable consequence, and you know they're going to spread. Now, it's not going to go with the jumps if you've got a reasonable control program, but it will go with spread. Now, from that perspective, all we're trying to say to people, look, at the end of the day, consider the vaccination program, because if this thing gets in, it's going to cause you all sorts of problems. The vaccines are there. Make use of them. The fertility issues that are there in terms of, those are what we think might be the first signs you actually see. So the fertility issues or birth of dummy calves, those are the ones. Because at the end of the day, remember that on only one of these herds, in this sort of small packet in the sort of east of England, and it's now across the whole of Devon, we're seeing it up in Yorkshire, we're seeing it creeping across England, we're going to start to see it arriving in Wales as well, you're going to see issues. Now, fortuitously, we don't seem to have seen what we think is wholesale problems in the sheep flocks just yet, but we're still waiting into the abortion season now, and we shall wait and see. In some of these herds, as I say, I remind you just the fact that only 50% of them produce viable calves. Now, irrespective of whether you're running a bull with them, you've got sex semen, etc., that is not a loss you can tolerate in terms of replacements, viability of cost, and we know certainly over here, calf prices are still holding all right. So at the end of the day, it's a substantial impact. But what does it do to the boy? Because always remember, if you're going to do a vaccination program for something like this, you need to include the boys in it as well. They're not immune. What we've seen with the boys is basically, again, you get issues with regards to sort of drop in fertility. And if you hit the boy's fertility, he's gone. That season's just lost, I'm afraid. It can also persist in semen. Now, before you then jump in and say, oh, well, what about vaccine? Every AI centre we have over here has vaccinated against it and not seen a single impact on the semen quality. And that's a fairly good measurement of what they're doing, because at the end of the day, these folk collect semen on a minute-by-minute basis, for want of a better expression. So they've got a fairly good idea. We've seen this, some of just certain packets have been involved. Maybe they're thinking, well, was it maybe because of the ground they've been on? Yeah, there's all sorts of potential things going into it. But realistically, we know that you can never really predict what's going to happen with BTV until, to some extent, it actually happens. Now, with the dummies, at the end of the day, these dummy calves, it can be quite marked in terms of severity, and that all depends on how much brain damage you've got, in terms of what severity you've got. But realistically, we know these calves realistically are not going to be very functional for the most part. In the vast majority of the situations we've seen, they've all been euthanized. Now, BTV8, funnily enough, we've seen with the same problem, and that was decades ago, or a decade and a bit ago. Now, this is one little webinar. This is one little bit of information. There is a ton of stuff being done. AHDB have a lot of information out there. So from the perspective of having a look-see, having a look into what else is going on out there, there's a lot of data and a lot of other things you can look at to at least possibly bring you up to speed. You might think, oh, there's not an awful lot of mention of vaccination. Well, of course there is, because they're trying to make sure you avoid this disease happening on your farm. And I've got friends and colleagues who say, well, I didn't bother vaccinating, I'm okay. You are this year, but that's why you get house insurance, because you never know when it's going to go wrong. So you need some kind of policy in place, and you need to consider it. And as the disease gets more established and probably effectively becomes endemic, which it's more than likely to be, it will go through phases where it gets hotspots, not lower hotspots. But our UK, certainly England vaccination protocols, they're all out there. The uptake of vaccine, nowhere near comprehensive enough for what we need to protect the national herds and flocks. So we do know there's other issues out there. Now, the beyond bit was to give you a bit of a, not put the fear of God into you, but just to make you remember that all the focus at present is on Bluetongue. There should be a few other things you need to consider that come along with midges, and one or two that come along without even midges, to be quite honest with you. One of them is episodic hemorrhagic disease, and you think, well, what kind of significance is that? Well, it's kind of significant because it's actually the same problem that you're going to see in deer and cattle, and it's actually present in quite a reasonable bit of Europe. America's been hammered by moo flu, as they call it, and again, that causes mastitis, maybe not a lot else, but it's now developing into strains that can jump into other species, etc. And moo flu has now been identified in Europe. So AI is still a problem, and it's got potential for that virus to move around. It's very, very capable. So we just need to be conscious of that. So there's a few slides just on a couple of other diseases that certainly your colleagues over there in terms of industry and certainly sort of government will give you some more additional guidance on. But these are where this is where EHD is appearing. And I'm not quite sure what level of deer population you've got in sort of Ireland, but we've got a hell of a lot of the beggars over here, and no amount of cullens keeping the numbers down. We've got maize crops all over the place. Perfect cover for deer to move during the summer, during the days without any issues. Similar presentation to BTV. And this is the problem we've got concerns with. Yeah, it doesn't hit sheep, but it does cause problems in cattle. And do people become dismissive of it? Do we not look for it? We've looked for every animal that we have in to test for BTV. We've tested for EHD. And that's a government policy. But the whole idea is because we know it's so close to us and because we know there's midges around, we want to make sure we can do these things. Lumpy skin disease, another one that seems to be circulating quite close to us in terms of Europe, and again, moved by midges. Now, another virus, yeah, fundamentally it's going to be a cattle problem. It can appear in other species as well, but it's a nasty virus. It causes all sorts of problems. We see about half a dozen to a dozen cases of suspect reported to us every year. Invariably come back as something unusual, like bites or sort of tumours or so. But again, they're diseases that need to be conscious of. And the worst one I don't need to mention too much on is foot and mouth. Now, yeah, in 25 we had an outbreak in Germany. In March 25, an outbreak in Hungary and Slovakia. February 26, we've just seen it appear in Cyprus. Now, you and I know what else is going on in the world at present with regards to sort of national conflict, and you're thinking, oh, well, nothing's going to come from Cyprus. Might be a lot of troops coming from Cyprus, a lot of people moving back from Cyprus. So what are they bringing with them? We just need to be conscious that diseases are out there and be alert. Notifiable disease is not something we ignore, not something we want to miss, because the impact both on a national level and international level for trade and everything else is profound. And foot and mouth, having lived through it in 2001, scares the hell out of me. And then you got flu. Now, moo flu has been one that's out there for a couple of years now in terms of the Americans got hammered by it, over 1,000 herds affected. It did cause substantial losses in terms of milk drop, but nothing much more. So people thought, oh, is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? It's a big deal in the fact that the virus can multiply potentially in cattle. It seems to be very tropic for mammary tissue, but there's always that potential to come across and do other issues. So we need to be conscious of these diseases as well. And for cases if you've got mass mastitis issues or significant mastitis not responsive to normal treatment and you're finding nothing on culture, maybe it's something you should consider. So in conclusion, I just want a couple of points really. The risk for vector-bornes is increasing, and they come with a variety of different diseases. BTV3 is the one we've got at present, and there can be other ones that affect other species as well. The vaccines that are out there are serospecific. They're not omnipotent vaccines. They don't protect against everything. I can't give you one shot and it's going to protect you against all 25 serotypes that are considered pathological. It won't do that. It basically protects you against the one that's actually protecting against, which is 3 in this case. There's 8, there's 4, there's 5, there's 12. These are all on the European borders right now of these countries, so we need to be very conscious it could arrive. But beyond that, notifiable disease is an issue. We've seen quite a few of these BTV3 outbreaks or suspicions being flagged up as suspect foot and mouths because nothing sits in sort of compartments and lanes as to where it should be. They can always vary quite a bit. Now, there's an update on BTV in terms of what's going on, and that's on the 11th of March. Now, quite happy for Donald to keep these slides or whatever type of stuff, and this has been recorded as far as I'm aware, so you've got that as an access point. If you want to find out more information from people who actually live BTV3 in this case, again, that's all there, and that's on next Wednesday as well. So it's really just a case of saying that there's a lot of information out there. Learn from us who have had our fingers and are still getting our fingers burned from it, because you need to act, and you need to act soon, in my opinion. Other than that, just a brief thank you for the invitation, and Powerbright that's actually done a lot of this work for us, and yourselves for listening, and slightly sorry for the delay that got us going, but this is basically a subject matter to make you think and look for other sources of information, because they're out there, but think about what you do, what you discuss with your vets, what they're going to tell you about vaccines, etc., and follow the guidance, because at the end of the day, you don't want to be one of those farms that's sitting looking at dopey calves left, right and centre. I know there's enough challenges in the farming day-to-day life. We don't need to add to them if we can avoid it. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alan. That was great now, and it's good to get an insight from someone, I suppose, who's experienced it for the last few years and is able to give us maybe a bit of a glimpse into the possibilities of our future, however they may be. If Avril's ready to come in there, we might go straight to you.
Yeah, hi everybody, and thanks Donal and colleagues for the invitation to speak. Yeah, look, that was a real cold dose of reality. Alan, really interesting talk. So I'm going to try and share my screen. So Donal, is that there?
It's up. Yeah, that slide's expanded there. So yeah, you're good to go, Avril.
Okay, super. Okay. So yeah, look at I'm just going to give sort of the Irish context on Bluetongue. So the first few slides I'm going to probably a little bit repetitive maybe to some of what Alan said, but yeah, just to go through. So obviously, 26 plus serotypes, and they're the 4 plus 12 are also circulating in Europe, mainly spread by biting midges, but also by infected semen and embryos. And it can be spread transplacentally, so infected calves and lambs can be born, which can help spread the new wave of disease. And then, not going to dwell on this, but as Alan outlined, it's spread by vector, so it's not like typical diseases that are spread animal to animal. It needs this midge to spread, bar where an infected bull will spread it through semen. And the thing to remember, and that's why you've probably seen in the media, is that we're talking about this low vector season. So the temperature has to be over 12 degrees, but for it to replicate in the midge, and for it to, so it's, typically during the summer spring, summer, I guess, when temperatures tend to be over 12 degrees consistently. Now, just take note that that's 12 degrees outside, but you just have to remember when animals are in houses, you can have temperatures inside sheds that might be above 12 degrees when the temperature outside is much lower. So it's just to remember it's where the cattle are that, what temperature it is and where the midges are. So if it's inside, the outside temperatures may not be that helpful. These are temperatures. This is from courtesy of Met Éireann. So, when we talk about 12 degrees, the last 3 years in Ireland, well, that's up to 2024, all May, the average temperature is 12 all the way through June, July, August, September. And even there in October, we had their temperatures above 12. That's also just down the bottom slide is to see the creamery, the milk production. So obviously in Ireland, the whole dairy industry, and I know we've got more farmer types here, but just to focus on the dairy industry, milk production is very much the whole industry is based on peak milk production and peak grass growth, which unfortunately is peak temperature, which unfortunately is peak midge activity. So just to bear that in mind. Current situation in Ireland, we obviously have a cold cow surveillance program, and that's where we found it. So as Alan referenced, that was in January when we found that animal. She'd been slaughtered 2 weeks previous, and then we detected it in the bloods, when they went through the lab as part of that surveillance program. The values the values of her blood, so you can measure the level of virus in the blood, would have indicated that she was probably infected around September. She was one of 3 animals that were empty. She may have been empty for another reason. She may have been empty for Bluetongue. We'll never know. But it was, as everybody knows, and was reported at the time down in Wexford, and the source at the time we anticipated it was likely infected midges blown across the Irish Sea. There was no imported animals, haven't had any imported animals from the continent since 2023. The implications within Ireland, the map on the right, you can see where we've had the positives. So, one in Louth that was associated with a post-abortion blood, one in Laois that was the Kildare, the animal that was detected in Kildare that would have been reported in the media. That animal had moved through a couple of herds, so it was in County Laois during that September period. Then we had our cluster down in Wexford, which was the index herds. And then when we did additional surveillance around Wexford, we found it in some more. And then the case that's sort of on the Wicklow Wexford border was, and I have some images later, that was from a calf, very similar, really interesting what Alan was pointing out. So that was a calf that was born and that was submitted to Kilkenny RVL with very similar signs to those calves that Alan showed. So at the moment, I suppose, a year ago, and it was interesting to what Alan was saying, if we'd had Bluetongue a year ago, we probably would have put in zones, we probably would have tried to eradicate it. However, the EU Commission have recategorised Bluetongue from a Class C to a Class DE disease. So basically from July, there'll be no such thing as a Bluetongue-free member state. It won't be a disease of eradication. It's gone into the group of diseases where all the production diseases live. So in July, we're not allowed to put in zones. So similar to what Alan alluded to the significant disruption it caused to the areas of GB that had zones, we would have, if we had put in zones, that would have, caused all those problems, and we would have had to lift them in July. At the moment, there is no active spread because the temperatures are too low. Yes, animals may be moving around. No other member state has managed to eradicate this disease. So the reality is this is a disease we're going to have to learn to live with. And I think it's really trying to understand what this disease will mean for Irish agriculture, and then, ensuring that then we take measures to reduce the risk. So our policy priority is to identify geographical extent of cases to assist the farmers with their vets in decision making before the high risk season. So I was interested, Alan mentioned about the insurance, you take out insurance policies hoping never to have to use them. And that's really, when you're considering vaccination is ensuring your stock against what's coming ahead of us. And the reality is we don't really know what's coming ahead of us. So the cases update, I've sort of covered that. This is the area down in Wexford. So there's the index herd. There was 3 herds in the fairly close. Then there was 2 in the 10-kilometre surveillance herds. There was the Kildare herd, and then there was a post-abortion cow in Louth, and the fetus tested in Arklow. So this is the slide from the fetus that went to Kilkenny. Very similar to what Alan showed. So this is where the blue arrow is. That's, there should be brain tissue in there. So instead of brain tissues, there's just a big cavitation or a big hole. Interestingly enough, from the outside, this fetus, it was a stillbirth, but it looked normal. There was no domed head. There was nothing from the outside that would make you think that there was anything wrong inside the brain of the animal. So it's just really important that, these stillbirths, dummy calves, Bluetongue should be considered as a cause of abortion. And just that's, within the blue circle, that sort of white tissue is the brain. That should fill out all that area within the blue circle. So this is again, the map that Alan showed is last July, the cases that were confirmed in GB, and the dark blue is, where livestock dense areas. So, which is all the west, mainly the west of the GB, which is obviously closest to us. And then the red arrows are where we've had our positives, including the one up in the north. So from the positive we had and the positive up in the north, we spoke to colleagues in UCD in the Central of Veterinary Epidemiology, and they were able to do some really nice modelling with the help of Met Éireann. So they looked back over the second half of last year to look at wind patterns to see when could have these midges have blown across from across the Irish Sea. So there's certain conditions that they've worked out that midges need that are ideal for midges to come across the Irish Sea, or to come across anywhere to be blown. So one is there can't be any rain. There has to be laminar wind flow, which is sort of straight wind flow. Ideally, the wind starts slow and then picks up speed. And then just the speed of the wind at different heights. And looking back, there was two nights that particularly stuck out as ideal conditions. And that was from the 23rd to the 24th of September. So the night of the 23rd to the night of the 24th. So this, what you're seeing on the left, is the model of the sort of plumes of midges, an illustration of what would have happened. So the stars are where we know there are infected cases from that previous diagram, or the previous map and the previous slide. And then you can see, and some people might think this is just a Wexford issue, but you can see those blue where it starts, those blue, it's starting now. So it's coming across, and it's really from Cork, Waterford, Kilkenny, up around Wexford, Wicklow, Louth, up into where they had it in the north. And interesting enough, if you watch the Isle of Man as well, the Isle of Man detected antibodies around the same time as us, and we've been in touch with the Isle of Man, and you can just see that they got, they're covered with blue lots of times, and they've had detected quite a bit of Bluetongue in their herds as well. So in September and October, they're the temperatures. So the other factor that we needed was that when the midges came, it had to be warm enough in GB for the midges that were blown across to have virus in them. So at that time, in that September, there was maximum temperatures of up sort of mid-teens or high teens, sort of 18, 19 degrees. And then you can see the minimum temperature is sort of, up around 12 degrees. So when it came over, there would have been midges infected. But then in October, the temperature would have been gradually dropping. So what we think is the midges came over, bit various animals, and then by the time Irish midges bit the infected animals, there wasn't enough. The temperatures had gone down, so it couldn't replicate in Irish midges. So we think it was probably, in most cases, was just a once-off infective period. So the big question is, what's going to happen next year? And there's there's a couple of different scenarios that can play out. It's quite possible we have infected pockets within Ireland, so we have it on the island, and it will just continue to spread. And that might be, lots. It's hard to know. It is really difficult to know how much infection we have on the island. The other option is that we may have to wait for another plume of infected midges to come over from GB. But either way, Bluetongue is here, and it's here to stay. And these are just more sort of temperature screens from Met Éireann. So where the red is above 12 degrees. So you can see in September, lots of days where it was above 12 degrees, and then in October, a few days, and then it got, reduced. Like you can see, over the October, mid-October to sort of 18, 19, 20, there were some times above 12, but probably not long enough to sustain and virus replication in the midges. And then, it gets cold. But as I say, these are outside temperatures, and we also have to factor in temperatures within houses, within sheds where cattle are and sheep. So our surveillance is based on identifying geographical extent of cases. We're not trying to find every single positive animal. So when we go out and do surveillance, we're not blood sampling every animal in the herd. We just have worked out that, for a herd instance, if we sample 50, then, the probability is one of those will be positive if it's within that herd. We also have national surveillance, so that's at our slaughter plants. That's where we detected the first case we have, and that's continuing. There's 1,000 bloods being taken from factories all over the country and being sent and being sampled every week for Bluetongue. Any bloods taken post-abortion are being sampled for Bluetongue. And then deformed calves, lambs going to our regional laboratories, they're all tested for Bluetongue. And then down in Kilkenny, because that's obviously the regional veterinary lab that's covering the southeast of the country, all submissions going into Kilkenny or VL are being sampled for Bluetongue. This is sort of to show what our targeted surveillance is. So this was more work that Severa did for us. So if you remember the slide I showed that showed the plumes of midges being blown across, from that they overlaid where the location of the herds.
Avril. Oh no, there it's come across now. It just didn't move. Sorry.
Okay, no problem, Donal. So so the places, the red hexagons are the hexagons we've taken out to do our active surveillance. So we're doing those over the next 2 to 3 weeks. To see if there's evidence of Bluetongue in these areas. So ideally, so we're not going to any herds that have already vaccinated, we won't include that in our surveillance. We'll be sampling animals that have been resident since the middle of September, because obviously that's when we think that they got infected. We will target any animals that have, clinical signs in the broadest sense of Bluetongue, because really there's no clinical signs that are specific to Bluetongue. Empty cows, aborted cows, sore eyes, lameness, like Alan went through some of the symptoms in the cows and adult animals, and nothing that would really suggest, shout out, oh, this is Bluetongue, and then ideally animals that are over 1 year. But it is looking for a needle in a haystack. So trying to find the Bluetongue, we're not going out sampling every herd in those areas. We're picking a small number of herds, but that layered with our factory surveillance, that layered with submissions from, post-abortion bloods, and then requesting that farmers submit, dead calves, dead lambs that are born, aborted fetuses, anything that could be suggestive of Bluetongue, please submit them to the lab, so then we can do our surveillance to get that information out there. We're not going to be restricting any herds, even waiting for results, or when we get results, there'll be no animals restricted if a positive is detected. And I suppose the advantage for a farm that does participates in the surveillance is they'll get a snapshot of what's happening within their own herd. And then, really the surveillance is tip of the iceberg stuff. So even the herds that we've detected is definitely tip of the iceberg, because, Alan outlined that there wasn't any big telltale clinical signs. The very first herd, when we went in and asked, what clinical signs was, there was one lame cow, one cow with a sore eye, really mild signs. So nothing that you might not see any other year. So don't be fooled by the number of cases that we have found. It really is tip of the iceberg stuff. Then, everybody is quite open. It's quite possible to do your own surveillance, and you might decide to do that for a number of reasons. But there are 3 private labs in Ireland that will do PCR testing. So PCR is the test that detects the virus. So they are in for farm labs and animal health laboratories. So you can get your own vet out, you can submit samples. That can be either, if you want to, if there's something going on with your herd that you just can't put your finger on, you want to take bloods. If you have your bull and you want to sample your bull, before you let him out, to see there's evidence of Bluetongue in him. Maybe you're selling stock. Lots of different reasons why you might want to submit samples for Bluetongue testing. And I would encourage you, to consider that as an option to do your own surveillance. There's a huge challenge with Bluetongue control and prevention. Alan mentioned about insecticides and repellents, not effective ways of preventing Bluetongue. Just, if you think of when you put midgie spray on yourself and you're out on an evening, you still end up getting bitten. It only takes one midgie, Bluetongue infected midgie, to transmit the virus. So it only takes one bite. So there's no way you can protect all your animals from being bitten or to protect all the bites. Midgies can fly up to 3 kilometres, but they're blown much further by the wind, and obviously that is demonstrated by the fact that they manage to be blown over by the wind across the Irish Sea. So if they survive that journey, it's pretty easy to see how it will spread within Ireland. And that has been the pattern in all the other member states in Europe, that it has just spread despite, a range of different rationale that those member states put in. So vaccines, there are 3 vaccines licensed in Ireland for Bluetongue virus 3. As Alan said, Bluetongue virus, the vaccines will only protect against the particular serotype. So we have Bluetongue virus 3 in Ireland. The vaccines we have available, they will protect against Bluetongue virus 3, but nothing else. They reduce the viremia, clinical signs and mortality rates. So they don't prevent the animals getting the virus, but they definitely suppress all the nasty signs. There's no duration of immunity established yet, but the drug companies have indicated that it's a once-a-year shot, or it's once-a-year course. Cattle are 2 shots, sheep are 1 shot. There was a high uptake in Europe in 2024, less than 2025, and 4 million vaccines were sold in GB last year. And Alan sort of outlined, you know, the issues that have been seen and his views on vaccination. How to get vaccines in Ireland? They are licensed, so vets have to apply to the department, to us, to get a license. There was about 180 licensed to private veterinary practices up to this week. So, you know, quite a significant number of licenses have been issued, considering the first case was towards the end of January. And that information is, and further information is, that's the website www.gov.ie/Bluetongue or .ie/Bluetongue. So what will happen in 26? You know, how severe is going to be the disease? And it really is like looking into a crystal ball. You know, Alan has shared their experiences in GB, which was really, really interesting. And, you know, yeah, so as Alan said, there are an awful lot of variables with Bluetongue. The temperature patterns, I alluded to this earlier. So, you know, this is sort of May is when it hits 12 degrees, and obviously June, July, August, September, October, it can still be 12 degrees. And then if you look at the top of those bar charts, that's when typically in Ireland, we have our, you know, the pregnancy. So the first third of pregnancy is going to just be happening May, June, July. Then when the cattle are mid-pregnancy, going to be July, August, September, and then final stages of pregnancy, you know, later on in the year when the temperatures are dropping. So this, you know, it's the really risky period. Early and mid gestation is if your herd gets exposed to midges that have Bluetongue and get bitten. You know, you could have significant impacts because, you know, the calves, the fetuses are developing, the embryos are developing, or fetuses in mid-gestation when damage can be done. Obviously for sheep, then you're looking at later on in the year, depending, you know, if you're a pedigree breeder, or if you're synchronizing sheep ewes to get them in lamb earlier, you know, you could be September, still above 12, October, still above 12, and then, you know, usually that's when rams are going out. And then that's just the bar graphs for the milk production. So again, May, peak milk productions, you know, still June, July, start August, and then starting to drop off. So the periods of our peak milk production in Ireland, you know, we really, our whole aim is to have this tight calving pattern so we can hit peak milk production in May. Unfortunately, you know, that's coinciding with the high temperatures and when midges potentially can be most active. So yeah, just the impacts of Europe, I won't dwell on this, but, you know, they had significant deaths. That hasn't been the scenario in Great Britain. So at, you know, at the very minimum, we're anticipating that we'll have fertility losses, you know, milder clinical signs. But I think that whole fertility, and especially what we heard earlier, that really could have a big impact on our farming systems. Yeah, Netherlands, BTV3, they had 55,000 dead sheep. When it first appeared in the second 6 months of 2023. And then, yeah, increase in abortions, premature births, and dairy herds, increased mortality, but that wasn't experienced in Great Britain. So, you know, we don't know what we're going to get, but you can see more images of these calves with the hydroencephaly, with, you know, where just the brainstem hasn't developed, just similar to what Alan would have shown in his videos and slides. You know, abortion, and then the reproduction, economic and animal health consequences. So really, you know, more than likely we're going to have to be, you know, see fertility and reproductive problems. And then just to reiterate that there was no association was found between the use of insecticides. So, you know, they haven't been shown to be preventative. And, you know, people wonder about, will we get national herd immunity it comes, seems to wax and wane. That seems to be the experience. So, and you'll always have new naive animals coming into your herd. So yeah, not something that probably can be relied on. So I mentioned this earlier about the recategorization of Bluetongue. So from July the 15th, it's going to go from a Class C to a Class D and E disease. So that means that it rules out the possibility of having an eradication program. And that was brought in because of the experience of other member states, that despite whatever measures they put in place, they've all failed to eradicate it. Like, we literally were the last country standing that didn't have Bluetongue, well, apart from Scotland, but Scotland's not in the EU, so we can claim the last country standing. So it will have some effects on intra-EU movements of animals and germinal products, but they haven't been published yet. So there will be slight amendments. I'm going to go through the effects on trade shortly, but just to be aware that these will change. What I'm going to tell you will change from the middle of the summer. So yeah, currently, susceptible animals. So we talk about susceptible animals for Bluetongue. Like, I suppose for tonight we're really talking about cattle and sheep, and they can't meet the intra-EU cert. So we're relying on countries introducing derogation. So that means countries tell the Commission that they're prepared to accept animals that are susceptible to Bluetongue, and then they put in different conditions. So all the member states are free to put in their own conditions. And these are, so at the website, like if you Google Bluetongue EU Commission or EU Commission Bluetongue, you'll come to the Bluetongue page on the EU website. And if you scroll down halfway down, you'll see this table. And, this goes through. So if you hyperlink on any of these, it'll explain the conditions that Bluetongue, that countries will accept animals in relation to Bluetongue. Today, we notified the Commission of the derogations we've put in place. So that got put on, that table got updated around 5 o'clock today. So you can see Ireland there in the middle. And then down at the bottom, the Northern Ireland also informed the Commission of the conditions that they will accept animals with Bluetongue. So basically, I'll go through it. I have a slide, but because we have Bluetongue virus 3, the north of Bluetongue virus 3, we are not putting any conditions on countries that only have Bluetongue virus 3. So basically restoring the status quo that was in existence before we found Bluetongue, and those measures are coming into play tomorrow. So from tomorrow, cattle can move up to the north for breeding and production. So the following countries specify no country conditions for Bluetongue virus 3. So these are this is for animals leaving Ireland. So we can send Ireland, because we've BTV3, we can send animals to Belgium, Croatia, Czech Republic, except that's just for confined establishments. So confined establishments, like if you think zoos, but I don't think we send too many cattle or sheep to Czech, France, Germany, Hungary, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Northern Ireland from tomorrow, and Spain. And then Italy and Portugal, they have said the same if the serotype is present at the place of destination. So the last time I checked, Italy have a small number of regions that they declare as Bluetongue free, but they are, I think the areas where we typically send our calves does have Bluetongue 3. So, there's no, we can send them to those places. This is the slaughter cert. So this is just probably what you know, that animals can move directly for slaughter unless Bluetongue was found at 30 days prior to the date of departure in the establishment. So calf trade, obviously we're starting to get into our peak calf export season, or calf, people selling calves. Netherlands, France and Spain, they have no conditions for BTV3. Italy, if calves, which obviously are under 90 days old, there's no requirements if BTV3 is present at the destination. Otherwise, the dam has to be vaccinated or a vector protection and a PCR test. But my understanding is that the locations where our calves go to in Italy do have BTV3, so there's no hindrance. Northern Ireland, oh, I thought I'd updated that slide. So ignore, well, it's true for this evening, but tomorrow that'll change to no conditions for BTV3 from tomorrow. But yeah, up till today, you had to have established immunity. And because none of the vaccines had established immunity, we couldn't certify. So we were engaging, we did engage, and from tomorrow, calves can go to north, well, cattle and sheep can go to the north, and then slaughter moves, yeah, they can go directly for slaughter. Poland is a little bit unusual, so we can't comply with number one because they talk about this within the immunity period guaranteed in the specifications of the vaccine. So none of the vaccines have written down the immunity period. Like I mentioned yesterday, the 12 months. So the drug companies, they will tell us verbally that, you know, their research or their studies or their trials have said 12 months, but they haven't done sufficient trials to be able to put it on their data sheet. So we can only try to apply the second one, that they've been protected from vector attacks by insecticides for at least 14 days prior to the date of movement, and they've been subjected during that period to a PCR test with negative results. It can be a little bit difficult to be able to certify that they've been protected by insecticides or repellents, but I understand that Poland is reviewing that derogation, so we'll just wait and see what happens there. Lambs, exported lambs to this, obviously live lambs, so the same rules would apply as per calves. Usually the derogations are split by age, less than or older than 90 days. So Greece and Luxembourg is less than or older than 70 days. And our derogation and the North's derogation, there's no age, it's just animals of all age. And then older cattle, sheep trade within the EU. So again, similarly, Netherlands, France, Spain, there's no conditions because we just have BTV3. Italy, again, as long as wherever the cattle or sheep are going have BTV3, then they can go. Northern Ireland, today this is valid. If I was doing this talk tomorrow, I would have Northern Ireland up beside Netherlands, France and Spain. Greece, animals over 70 days have to be vaccinated or vector protected, and a PCR test is required. And then slaughter moves, they can go direct for slaughter. So Denmark, Hungary, Netherlands, Poland, Slovakia have said that they will accept vaccines. Netherlands don't, you know, because they're one of the countries that say that if the country of origin only has BTV3, then, you know, they don't apply any conditions. And yeah, that's just Belgium, Croatia, Germany, France, Hungary, Luxembourg, Netherlands and Spain. Because we just have BTV3, no conditions apply. GB, like I know now that we've opened up the trade with the North, then the tension will go to trying to open up trade with GB. GB is obviously a third country. They're not part of the EU. So in their cert, it talks about that they can be vaccinated. However, the killer is, and the animals are still within the immunity period of time guaranteed in the specifications of the vaccine. So the problem is none of the vaccines have guarantee an immunity period in their data sheets. The drug companies have told us that they're working to it, and they're, you know, working towards getting a confirmed duration of immunity. But again, it's just watch the space, wait and see. However, you know, we will, now that we've resolved the North-South issue, you know, we will start open conversations with authorities in GB, but it will be a little bit more complex. And then the other third country live trade, like quite a lot of our animal health certs say that we have to have country freedom for a period of 12 to 24 months, but we are engaging with the ministries in other third countries, you know, and we have sort of negotiated derogations and ways, you know, ways to certify animals to get exports out. So that's an ongoing process. So that's the end of my slides. Thank you very much for listening. Any questions you might have, ndccbtv@agriculture.gov.ie. Just a flag, seeing that Alan gave us those lovely slides at the end to scare about the other exotic diseases, like completely right. Cyprus has foot and mouth. They've around Nicosia, which is the capital, where if anybody's going on holidays to Cyprus, like all their foot and mouth that falls within the 10K zone. Lumpy skin disease is in France and Spain. There's sheeppox virus. There's peste petite ruminants. There's a range of diseases on the continent that, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, you would never have expected to see in, middle Europe and coming northwards. So now that we've put this derogation in place, it means that countries that only have Bluetongue virus can send, we can import cattle from those places. And then other countries can, no more than we take advantage of derogations other member states have put in. They can send animals by applying various conditions that we've put in place. So I really would ask you to consider, to think very carefully before you would import animals from the continent, because it's not just Bluetongue that we have to be concerned. Like, Bluetongue is going to be difficult enough to deal with. It is going to cause economic difficulties, but there are diseases out there that would just put Bluetongue in the halfpenny place. So, we just have to continue our vigilance. And I just want to thank all the farmers that participate in the surveillance for their cooperation. And please keep submitting anything bizarre to the labs. And thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Avril. Look, that's great. You went through quite a bit of information there, and all very useful. Look, it's great to see the north-south trade opening up tomorrow, and I'd just like to acknowledge the amount of work you put into that over the last few weeks. So we might take a few questions if you're happy enough to take a few. I know we've ran slightly over time. But I might just start with yourself, Avril. Just what's the reporting procedure for it? Just if guys have suspected cases.
Yeah, so probably the easiest, well, there are two ways. They can ring their local RVO, the regional veterinary office themselves, and they could contact the regional veterinary laboratory, or they can contact their own vet, and their vet will notify us.
Perfect. And Alan, there's quite a few questions here on vaccination, so I might try and put them together. So I suppose that the first one, who should be considering vaccinating, and what kind of animals on the farm should they be looking at? So calves, cows, heifers.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's how much money you've got. If you've got the money, spend it on every one of them. If you haven't, then you maybe need to think about the breeding stock as being your primary protection area. Talking to sheep people, some of them have been very sort of looked at pedigrees and said, well, actually, if pedigrees, yes, but commercials, we've decided to run the risk. As Avril's pointed out, the issue is that you then maintain the disease regardless, and the impact for the national herds and flocks are quite profound. But it all depends on what your costings are. I know there's a question put in terms of how much is it. That's a piece of string. Depends on how much your vets are going to charge you, etc. So that's not something we would know. So I think realistically, let's have a chat with your vet, come up with it as a herd or flock plan, and see what you think are the key risks and key problem areas you want to address. But I would certainly look at cattle as being something I would want to cover, and certainly breeding cattle, because the implications for stillborns and abortions are just too much in my case. And I know it could be sporadic, as a bit like Schmallenberg. When we saw Schmallenberg arrive in 2011, we said, well, actually, certain farms get hammered by it, and other farms it just seems to walk past and doesn't cause any problems. You can't run that risk. As I say, 50% of your calves lost. It's not worth it. You need to vaccinate.
Perfect. And just while you're on the vaccine, I suppose vaccinating pregnant cows and stuff, we've quite a compact calving season here. So there's going to be a certain amount vaccinated if you're looking for the onset of immunity to kick in, and just kind of a bit of chat around that when the immunity onsets and when guys should be thinking about it.
Well, for cattle, it's a 2-shot course. So realistically, you're not looking at protection until the second shot's gone in. You're probably using it usually 7-10 days after that second shot. So you're looking at about a month in terms of the gap. But again, that's discussion with your private vet as to what they feel is going to be most appropriate. Drug companies will give you advice and guidance, but at the end of the day, if it's not in the data sheet in terms of invested protection, in terms of what they've done, then you can't say it's going to be a guarantee. And drug companies will give you some insight in terms of what's happened in the UK and what they've found. But the problem is, this is very much a dynamic and, shall we say, sort of rapidly running situation. So I would vaccinate as soon as you can. At the end of the day, yes, we know the risk period is pretty much that early to mid gestation in terms of getting real significant damage done to calves. But realistically, we don't know if you get a high burden and you end up with a cow with pound temperature, she's going to kick a calf out at 8.5 months. So you need to vaccinate as soon as you can. And if there's options to vaccinate in calf animals and thinking, does that run the risk? Yeah, maybe the risk's there, but I'd probably still vaccinate and say, right, you've covered them at least.
Just there was one last question, and I think about fertility in bulls. You were saying you haven't really seen any issues.
The fertility in bulls issues is all related to animals that have been infected naturally. The use of vaccine in animals for stud work, they've vaccinated their livestock in those studs and they have seen no impact on fertility. So the vaccine's safe to give. If you get a natural infection, your fertility could go down the pan quite rapidly. So vaccinate them.
Perfect. Avril, could you just give us a bit of a run through on the procedure around applying for a vaccine and kind of the time scale that we're expecting for that?
Yeah, so at the moment we only have one vaccine. There's 3 vaccines licensed, but there's only one available on the market. But there is moves. So we have that license, so we're happy to take them. We have been in conversation with those vaccine manufacturers, so hopefully they will become available. But at the moment, there appears to be sufficient stock in Ireland. So it's the vet that applies for a license to us. It's 3 to 5 days turnaround. If there's any issue, or just get the vet to contact the department a second time if for some reason, but it's 3 to 5 days turnaround. I think, what was it, 180 licenses. So it's a license per practice. We're asking for herd numbers to, for us, the vets and farmers, to notify us of what herds are vaccinating. So then for surveillance, we know, because we're checking antibodies, that when we do our surveillance, we're looking for antibodies. So if the herds have been vaccinated, the animals will have antibodies. We can't tell if they're vaccinated antibodies or natural infection.
Perfect. Avril, just while you're on there, I suppose it might be hard to know, but what do you kind of imagine the ongoing monitoring and restrictions you foresee coming in for the next few months?
We won't be introducing any restrictions. We're March, April, we're going to continue doing the surveillance at the meat plants. Then every May we do BVD surveillance, so we'll be able to test them for Bluetongue. The labs will continue doing their the regional veterinary labs will continue doing their surveillance and sampling. We're doing that round of active surveillance out in farms at the moment, which I showed on the maps. So we'll continue doing passive surveillance. We'll probably just reassess March, at the end of April, and then decide what we're going to do then. But we're always doing sort of surveillance sampling at slaughter plant level for different diseases to prove country freedom. So more than likely we'll be able to continue. We have a continued stream of bloods, and that sort of gives us a good geographical spread.
Perfect. And just, is there any restrictions at the moment in importing semen from the UK or embryos?
We can't import. Yeah, so that trade of because semen and germinal products like embryos are Bluetongue can be spread with them, and they don't meet certification requirements. And just with GB being a third country, it just is an added challenge to resolving those trade issues.
Perfect. And just one last one I just seen come in there about organic farming. Do they need a derogation to vaccinate?
To be honest, I don't know. Like I would
Yeah.
imagine, yeah, I don't know. I mean, assume, like, this is assuming, and you know what assume means.
Yeah.
So look, I would talk to your organic certifying body. I can't imagine that vaccination. I imagine if you're an organic farmer, you should be able to vaccinate. I genuinely don't know. So check with your organic certifying body, but it would, you know, and if there is an issue, email into NDCC, BTV, and we will talk to organic certifying bodies. But, you know, do check with whoever you're with. But if there's an issue, yeah, I'd suggest you email into us and we'll look at it. I did see, just from a cost perspective, I've heard different costs. Like, obviously it's a commercial decision between farmers and their vets, but you know, €5 a shot is the most you should be charged. But that, it's, you know, nothing to do with us, but anecdotally that's what I've been told.
Perfect. Just want to, whichever one of you want to take it on passive immunity for calves if the cow has been vaccinated. And I just see a question up there on split calving. I suppose that's kind of been answered already on the it's safe to vaccinate pregnant and non-pregnant cows. So I don't know who wants to take the other one there.
Passive immunity is really going to be based on how much you stimulate the cow's immune system. So if she's really been vaccinated prior to getting a calf, unless you give her a booster around about calving time, she's not likely to have much of a stimulus in terms of colostral production for that antigen. So it's really related to antigen stimulation around the time of calving as to how much you get in terms of passive. Again, the innate immune response that actually comes with this vaccine, you might get a little bit, but it wouldn't be considered to be substantive to protect the calf against Bluetongue.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Look, I suppose we've been on for about an hour and 20 minutes now. So I don't know if David Haller chairs on there, and if you might want to say a few words to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Donal. Apologise at the start, I couldn't get on. I had my full AT team working here, including Niamh. Thanks, Niamh. Yeah, look, it's great that the trade north-south has opened. And thanks very much to Avril and all your colleagues on the work that you've put in the last number of weeks on that. I suppose the important thing is now that is open, that everyone is careful and not to bring in anything from mainland Europe that we don't want. BTV3 is here. We're going to have to live with that. But as Alan mentioned, all those other things that are floating about, we don't want any of those. And anybody who does feel the need to import stock, they need to think long and hard about it and take every precaution. I suppose that's really all I have to say. Just keep monitoring your stock. Take the advice there on vaccination very seriously. I suppose when we heard about Bluetongue first, we weren't particularly worried. We thought there's no clinical signs, sure, it's like the common cold, we'll get used to it. But when you hear about embryo loss and defective calves being born and all that, it's a very serious issue that has to get proper consideration. So again, talk to your vets, and Donal probably has a list of questions there that we probably can't answer tonight, but hopefully we'll get maybe a question and answer sheet done in the future for some of the issues. But the main thing is get talking to your own private vet and find out what you need to do for your own herd. Thank you, and thanks Alan, thanks Avril, and thanks Donal.
Perfect. Thanks there, David. Yeah, look, we might end it at that, but I suppose the three key points is it is a notifiable disease. So, you know, monitor your herd and keep out for signs of the disease, speak to your private vet, and, you know, it is only BTV3 in the country, and hopefully we can keep it that way. So just thanks to Avril and Alan, and thanks to everyone for taking the time to come on tonight. I know it's quite a busy time of the year, so thanks to everybody. Cheers.
Thanks all. Have a good evening. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.